The message arrived on Daniel Reynolds' phone while Seattle rain tapped softly against his apartment window. Don't come to New Year's dinner. It'll be awkward. No greeting, no explanation. It's just that. Daniel read it once, then again, as if the words might change. They didn't. His brother Mark had already decided. Daniel was no longer welcome at the family table. For a moment, Daniel just stood there, phone in hand, staring at the reflection of a man people like to call potential, but never successful. Outside downtown Seattle was alive holiday lights, music drifting from bars, people rushing with purpose. Inside, his apartment felt too quiet. Mark had always been like this. Loud, confident, certain he deserved more space in every room. Growing up in Ohio, Mark spoke first and longest. Daniel listened. When Mark chose finance and polished shoes, Daniel chose computers and long nights. When Mark chased applause, Daniel chased ideas. Their parents praised both in different ways, but Mark heard only what fed his pride. Daniel learned early that silence could be safer. Daniel typed a reply, erased it, typed again. I understand. Happy New Year. He hit send before doubt could stop him. The memory of past dinners came rushing in. Mark making jokes about Daniel's little projects. Relatives nodding politely, then changing the subject. Someone always asking, so when will you get a real job? Daniel had smiled through it every time. This year, the chair would stay empty. He placed his phone face down on the table and turned back to his laptop. The screen glowed with charts and figures, real things. Things that grew because he worked for them. This was the world where he belonged. A notification popped up. Emily Carter was calling. You saw the numbers? Emily asked, her voice quick but warm. Yes, better than projected. I thought you'd like that, she said. Then she paused. You sound off. Daniel hesitated. Emily had known him since college in Boston, back when they shared cheap coffee and impossible dreams. She could hear what others missed. My brother doesn't want me home for New Year's, Daniel said simply. There was a brief silence on the line. I'm sorry. It's fine, he said, though it wasn't. I've got work. You always do, she replied softly. Emily had been there from the beginning. When Daniel quit his stable job to build something of his own, she was the first to say, let's try. They rented desks in a co-working space in Vancouver, survived on savings and hope, and failed more times than Daniel liked to remember. But they learned. They built Northbridge not fast, not loud, but solid. Now, Northbridge offices stretched across cities Daniel once only dreamed of visiting. Still, he kept his life simple. No luxury cars, no public interviews. He preferred results to recognition. After the call ended, Daniel leaned back and closed his eyes. He thought about his parents' house, the smell of food, the laughter. He wondered if his mother would notice his absence before or after dessert. Across the country in Chicago, Mark Reynolds was having a very different evening. Mark stood in front of his mirror, adjusting his tie for the third time. The reflection pleased him. He had worked hard for this moment. Years of climbing, networking, and making sure the right people noticed him. On his desk lay a folder with the logo of Northbridge Holdings. Tomorrow was his interview. Mark smiled. This is it, he said to himself. He thought about the New Year's dinner he was hosting. Important year, important guests. He didn't need Daniel's quiet presence reminding everyone of paths not taken. Daniel made him uncomfortable not because Daniel failed, but because he didn't seem to care about Mark's version of success. Mark convinced himself it was practical. Different worlds, he muttered. Back in Seattle, Daniel packed away the sweater his mother loved to see him wear. He folded it carefully, placing it back in the closet like a promise postponed. Night deepened. Fireworks tests cracked faintly in the distance. Daniel returned to his desk. The company board meeting notes waited. Decisions needed to be made. Before the year closed, he scanned names, figures, strategies. At the bottom of the page, his signature appeared. Daniel Reynolds, CEO. He didn't linger on the title. He rarely did. His phone buzzed again. A message from Emily. If you're not going home, you're not alone. We'll make it a good night. Daniel smiled for the first time that evening. The next day came fast. Morning light filled the Northbridge headquarters as Daniel walked through the glass doors. Employees nodded respectfully. Some smiled. He returned each greeting with the same calm warmth. He had built this place carefully, choosing people who valued work over ego. Emily met him near the elevator. "You're joining interviews today?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel said. "Final rounds." She raised an eyebrow. "Anything interesting?" "Possibly," he replied, though he hadn't yet connected the names. In Chicago, Mark arrived early at the Northbridge office building. The lobby was impressive clean lines, quiet confidence. He straightened his jacket and took a breath. This was where he belonged, he thought. The receptionist checked his name and handed him a badge. "You'll be meeting HR first," she said. "Then leadership." Mark nodded, already rehearsing his answers. Back in Seattle, Daniel reviewed the interview schedule between meetings. One name caught his eye. Mark Reynolds. He paused. For a brief moment, memories flash, shared rooms, old arguments, laughter that faded too soon. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Everything okay?" Emily asked. "Yes," Daniel said, closing the file. "Just interesting." He didn't change the schedule. Daniel believed in fairness, in letting people show who they were. The day moved quickly. By afternoon, Daniel boarded a flight east for meetings. He sat by the window, watching clouds drift past, thinking about how strange life could be, how paths that split could circle back in unexpected ways. He didn't feel anger. He felt something quieter, acceptance. As the plane descended, Daniel checked his phone. A message from his mother. "Wish you were coming for New Year's. Call me later," Daniel typed back. "I will." He slipped the phone into his pocket and stood as the seatbelt sign turned off. In Chicago, Mark was shaking hands with HR, smiling confidently, unaware that the next room would hold more than opportunity. It would hold truth. And neither brother was prepared for what that truth would change. The interview room was quiet, almost too quiet, as Mark Reynolds straightened his tie for the last time. The walls were glass, the air crisp, and the soft hum of the office outside made everything feel serious, official. He took a deep breath. This was Northbridge Holdings, the company everyone in Chicago talked about, the one he had worked years to impress. Today was his moment. Today he would prove he belonged. He smiled at his reflection in the glass wall. Confidence was his armor. Preparation, his sword. Every answer had been rehearsed. Every question anticipated. Every impression meticulously crafted. This was the kind of day that changed lives, and Mark wanted it to change his. He didn't expect anything to shake him, not the nerves, not the stress, not even the quiet feeling that maybe, just maybe, someone else in his life could overshadow him. The HR manager walked in with a tablet in her hand, a warm, professional smile lighting her face. "Good afternoon, Mark. Before we begin, we need to confirm something. Do you have any relation to Daniel Reynolds?" Mark blinked. The question seemed simple, innocent, routine. He nodded, smiling politely. "Yes, he's my younger brother." The HR manager's eyes widened slightly, not in judgment but in subtle recognition. "Oh, then you know our CEO well." The words hit Mark in an unexpected way. CEO? Daniel Reynolds. His quiet, jobless brother, or so he thought was. The leader of the very company that was about to decide Mark's future. Mark laughed nervously, assuming she must have meant someone else, a coincidence. But as the door opened, the truth became undeniable. Daniel stepped in, calm, poised, and confident in a way that made the room feel smaller. He didn't need a suit to impress, didn't need a rehearsed smile, didn't need to demand attention. It was their naturally presence, authority, and quiet power. For a moment, Mark froze. This wasn't the brother who faded into the background during family dinners. This was someone who carried a room without trying. Someone who made silence feel like respect. Daniel. Mark whispered, unsure whether to laugh, apologize, or deny everything he had thought about his younger brother. Daniel nodded, polite but reserved. Hello, Mark. The HR manager stepped aside, giving them space, but the tension in the air was palpable. Daniel had been present in the room, not to intimidate, but to observe. His questions were sharp but fair, probing without condescension, guiding the interview to reveal Mark's real skills, not just rehearsed answers. Mark tried to keep up, answering confidently, but the dynamic had shifted. For the first time, he realized the shadow he had always cast over Daniel was no longer relevant. Daniel was the authority here. Mark's mind raced. He thought of New Year's Eve, how he had banned Daniel from the family dinner, the empty chair he had celebrated as freedom from embarrassment. How small that moment seemed now. It wasn't just a missed dinner anymore. It was the revelation that all his pride, all his preparation, all his assumptions about success might be flawed. Daniel hadn't needed validation from anyone. He had built something real, something enduring, something that could not be ignored. The HR manager's voice brought him back. Thank you, Daniel. You may step out. Daniel nodded, leaving Mark to gather himself. Outside the room, Mark struggled to process the collision of past and present. Pride, embarrassment, envy, and respect twisted inside him. He thought about the countless times he had mocked Daniel for his quiet ambition. The dismissive comments at family gatherings, the subtle laughter when Daniel pursued his own path. Mark realized how misguided he had been. The world he had been chasing, the recognition, the applause, the temporary victories was only a fraction of what Daniel had created quietly, patiently, without drama, without seeking anyone's approval. Daniel's success was not loud. It was real. It was unshakable. Later that evening, as Mark walked out of the Northbridge building, he tried to find words. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked, voice low, almost a confession. Daniel's eyes were steady. "You never asked? Shh, you just laughed." Mark felt a twinge of guilt he couldn't shake. All those years, all the teasing, all the assumptions, and for what? Not for Daniel, certainly. Daniel had moved forward without needing his brother's validation, without needing his approval, without needing his presence at dinner tables that now seemed trivial in comparison to real-life achievements. Daniel didn't linger on the past. He didn't lecture. He walked with quiet authority, leaving Mark to confront his own insecurities. The irony was almost poetic. The brother he had once dismissed as small, irrelevant, and lacking ambition had been leading the very company that could make or break Mark's career in a single decision. Mark returned home that night. The city. Lights of Chicago shimmering outside his window. The holiday bustle felt different now. He thought about the empty chair at New Year's dinner, the meals without Daniel, and the laughter that had often felt like a spotlight on his own insecurities. He realized the absence had been a lesson he hadn't anticipated, a lesson that Daniel's life, choices, and achievements had taught him silently. Meanwhile, Daniel was back in Seattle on a rooftop overlooking the skyline, fireworks igniting the night sky. Emily handed him a cup of hot chocolate, her presence grounding, familiar, and quietly celebratory. "You okay?" she asked. Daniel smiled, looking out at the bursts of color above. "I think I am now," he said. He wasn't talking about the interview, the confrontation, or even Mark's presence in his professional world. He was talking about the peace that came from living authentically, from achieving success on his terms, from proving nothing to anyone except himself. Emily reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. They had always understood each other without words, shared victories and failures, hopes and frustrations. Tonight felt different, not because of fireworks or New Year's magic, but because Daniel finally felt seen not by the world at large, but by those who mattered and by himself. Below them, the city cheered for the new year. Somewhere across the country, a family table sat with an empty chair, and Mark for the first time understood its significance. It wasn't just a seat. It was a symbol of absence, of choices, and of lessons learned too late. Daniel's gaze shifted to Emily, softening. For years, he had chased ambition quietly, purposefully, and now surrounded by friendship, respect, and the glow of city lights, he understood the real meaning of accomplishment. Not revenge, not recognition, not validation. It's just truth. The clock struck midnight, and Daniel made a quiet wish, a wish not for wealth or power, but for a future built on integrity, understanding, and love. Fireworks reflected in his eyes, echoing the warmth swelling inside his chest. He knew some people might never see his worth, but that didn't matter anymore. As he stood on that rooftop, Emily beside him, Daniel realized he had everything he had ever needed: control over his life, the respect of people who mattered, and a chance to embrace possibilities with open arms. Mark, miles away, stared at the ceiling of his apartment, reflecting on the collision of past pride and present humility. He knew things could never be the same. Daniel had not just grown into a leader, he had grown beyond the reach of judgment, resentment, and doubt. And in that moment, the new year didn't just mark the start of another calendar. It marked a turning point, a lesson in patience, in quiet strength, in the power of building a life without needing applause, and in the realization that sometimes the people you dismiss the most are the ones who will teach you your greatest truths. As Daniel and Emily watched the fireworks fade, the city below still buzzing, Daniel felt a smile spread naturally, not triumphant, not vengeful, just serene, peaceful. And in that peace, he understood the most valuable lesson of all, that success earned quietly, with integrity, respect, and love, is the kind that lasts forever. And somewhere, a brother once blinded by pride finally understood the meaning of the empty chair he had once celebrated. The new year had begun, and for Daniel Reynolds, it was just the beginning of everything he had been quietly building all along.